Under the vast domes of the Galactic Defense Academy, thousands of cadets from dozens of species gathered each cycle to learn the ways of strategy, war, and discipline. The lecture hall on this day was filled with young minds eager to absorb the lesson being delivered by instructor Veshril, who stood tall with scaled skin and eyes that glowed faintly. He spoke with authority, declaring that humanity was a fragile species incapable of surviving combat without the aid of their crude tools and advanced weapons. He insisted that without rifles, blades, or machines, humans were helpless beings prone to collapse when stripped of their technology. The cadets whispered among themselves, nodding to the words of their teacher. For many, this was not the first time they had heard the claim. It was repeated across star systems that humans were inventive. Yes, clever in engineering, yes, but physically, they were weak. The general belief was that humanity leaned on its machines to compensate for its soft bodies and limited strength. Veshril smiled at the eager faces, his voice carrying through the hall with practiced certainty, telling them that in any real confrontation, a human without weapons would fall faster than sand through an hourglass. It was then that the sound of soft laughter echoed from the back of the hall. Heads turned sharply, ears and eyes focusing on the lone human sitting quietly at the rear. His name was Kai. The only human admitted this year to the academy. He leaned against the seat, relaxed, a calm grin spreading across his face. His laughter was not loud, but it carried weight, because it broke the silence that had been shaped by years of unquestioned teaching. The cadets stared at him in disbelief. Some sneered, others smirked, thinking the human had lost his mind. Veshril's eyes narrowed, his tone dropping low as he demanded to know what was so amusing. Kai rose slowly, his frame lean but solid, his eyes sharp yet calm. He offered no apology. Instead, he spoke with words that carried both patience and fire. He said that the lecture was wrong, that humans did not need weapons to fight, because the first weapon of a human was always the body itself. Trained, hardened, and sharpened through endurance trials, through gravity that pressed heavier than many worlds, and through survival on a planet that demanded constant adaptation, Kai's voice was even but carried enough conviction that it rippled through the rows of cadets. Veshril stiffened the muscles of his jaw, twitching. He asked Kai to explain further, but the human did not give long arguments. Instead, he simply said that words would not convince anyone. Only a demonstration could do that. The room buzzed with anticipation. The cadets whispered about what they might see. Veshril, who could not allow his authority to be challenged in his own hall, announced that Kai would face a live demonstration in the Blue Zone, the Academy's chamber where technology was nullified. No tools, no weapons, only raw skill. Veshril declared that the human would face cadets under strict observation, so that everyone could witness the truth. Kai accepted without hesitation, his smile calm but unreadable. Some cadets laughed, believing the human had sealed his humiliation. Others whispered nervously, for there was something in the steadiness of his voice that unsettled them. After class ended, word spread quickly through the dorms that a spectacle was set for the next cycle, the first human test without weapons. The air buzzed with anticipation as bets were made and rumors flew about how fast Kai would be forced to yield. Many expected a short show, a moment that would end with the human pinned and broken before the entire academy. But in the quiet of his quarters, Kai prepared in silence. He did not sharpen a blade or polish armor. Instead, he stretched his body muscles, flowing under control, breath steady like the tide of oceans. His mind replayed lessons from Earth, the drills of balance, the control of movement, the discipline of restraint. His ancestors had survived not because of machines alone, but because the body itself had been shaped as a tool honed against struggle and refined by hardship. When the morning came, Kai stood at the entrance of the Blue Zone, ready to prove that humanity was more than the galaxy believed. The cadets filled the observation decks, their voices a storm of excitement. Veshril announced the rules with cold precision. No weapons, no technology, no mercy. In judgment, Kai stepped forward into the chamber. The doors closing behind him, silence fell. The legend of human weakness was about to be tested, and the galaxy's assumptions would soon be shaken. The Blue Zone chamber was a vast circle of polished floors and smooth walls lined with hidden sensors that glowed faintly as they activated to block every form of technology. The Academy cadets gathered in the galleries above, leaning over the rails to watch their first human demonstration instructor. Veshril stood near the command post, his arms folded tightly across his scaled chest, his voice echoing with authority as he announced that Kai would face 2 volunteer cadets of the Dronkin species creatures, bred for strength with heavy frames and metallic bone structures. The audience erupted in murmurs, convinced that the human would be crushed in seconds. Kai stood calmly in the center of the chamber, his bare hands at his sides and his breathing steady. The Dronkin cadets entered with heavy steps, their eyes glowing faintly, and their armored skin reflecting the bright lights overhead. Veshril gave the signal to begin, and without hesitation, the 2 larger cadets advanced, one moving to Kai's left, the other circling to his right. The crowd expected the human to panic, but instead Kai's movements were smooth and deliberate. He shifted his feet in small arcs, his eyes sharp, and his body loose like water waiting for the tide to break. The first Dronkin lunged forward, swinging, a powerful arm meant to wrap around Kai and pin him down. The human stepped to the side at the last possible moment, his body moving in harmony with the strike instead of resisting. He guided the heavy limb downward and pulled with surprising precision. The Dronkin lost balance, stumbling across the floor with a crash. The second cadet rushed in, aiming to grab Kai's torso, but Kai rotated on the ball of his foot, sliding under the grasp and using leverage from his hips. He redirected the larger body sideways. The alien toppled into his partner, both crashing to the ground in a heap. Gasps erupted from the audience. Cadets who had believed the human would be humiliated were now watching in stunned silence. Kai did not strike. He did not kick or claw. He simply used angles, balance, and timing to make the power of his opponents work against them, rising again. Both Dronkin charged with renewed determination, their pride stung. Kai breathed deeply, his body low to the ground, ready once more. The first alien threw a punch wide and heavy. Kai pivoted inside the strike, his shoulder pressing against the cadet's chest, and with a twist of his waist, he sent the alien flying over his back into the floor with a thunderous thud. The second Dronkin tried to seize Kai in a bear-like embrace, but Kai lowered himself, dropped his center of gravity, and slipped free. Before the grip closed, he hooked an arm around the alien's elbow, guided the weight forward, and allowed the momentum to finish the throw. The alien crashed down, breathing heavily, unable to rise quickly. The audience broke into loud shouts, some cheering, some still mocking, but none could deny the skill displayed. Veshril's face remained stern, though a shadow of unease flickered in his eyes. Kai stepped back, his breathing steady, his voice clear as he explained while the aliens recovered. He spoke not to boast, but to teach. He told the cadets that the body was always the first weapon of humanity, that from childhood, humans were trained by their world's gravity to endure weight and strain, that their muscles were not built for show but for resilience. He said that bones broken by falls taught them balance, that endless running across plains taught them stamina, and that survival had never depended solely on tools, but on their ability to use themselves as living instruments. The cadets listened more carefully now, some leaning forward to capture every word. Veshril raised a clawed hand and ordered the challenge. To continue doubling the opponents this time, 4 cadets would enter the blue zone to press the human further. The chamber doors opened, and new challengers stepped forward. Tall insectoid warriors known for speed and agility, their limbs sharp, and their movements quick. Veshril announced that Kai must endure against all 4 within a fixed time. If he could last until the final chime, then he would be declared competent. But if he failed, his claim would be dismissed forever. Kai bowed his head, slightly acknowledging the new trial, his calm never breaking, though his eyes sharpened with focus. The 4 spread out, circling him like predators in the wild. The silence of the chamber was heavy. Only the hum of the sensors filled the air. Then, the bell rang. The fight resumed. Kai crouched, his hands open, ready to use nothing but the flow of his body. The test had only just begun, but already the Academy knew this demonstration was unlike any lesson they had ever been taught before. The chamber, lights dimmed slightly as the next round began, and 4 cadets with insectoid forms spread across the blue zone, their wings buzzing faintly, though suppressed by the nullifying field that denied any lift or external advantage. They were tall and thin, yet their legs were coiled with speed and their arms curved like blades made of living chitin. The audience leaned closer, the murmurs growing louder as they anticipated the moment when the lone human would finally falter. Instructor Veshril raised his hand and with a sharp command the trial began. The insectoid cadets rushed forward with flawless coordination, two darting from the left and right while the other two pressed from behind in a pincer. Designed to overwhelm, Kai lowered his stance, his feet sliding across the polished floor. He did not panic. His breath was steady and his eyes flickered with calm calculation. The first attacker lunged its arms, slicing forward like twin spears. Kai moved sideways, letting the strike graze past his shoulder. His hand clamped down on the joint of the alien's arm, and with a subtle twist and turn of his hips, the momentum of the insectoid's speed carried it crashing into the wall. The crowd gasped, but the other three pressed forward without hesitation. The second one aimed a sweeping leg strike. Kai lifted himself over the blow, using the motion to roll across the cadet's back and land on the opposite side. The third cadet came at him in mid-spin, but Kai simply pushed lightly on the elbow, redirecting the force so that both colliding bodies tangled with one another. The fourth cadet hissed angrily and came straight at Kai with a flurry of sharp thrusts. Kai stepped back, his body weaving in and out of the attacks, his eyes never leaving the rhythm of the strikes. Then, with a quick pivot, he dropped low, seized the cadet's ankle, and gave a sharp pull. The alien fell forward, losing balance. Kai guided the motion into the ground, releasing just before impact, leaving the opponent unharmed but stunned. The arena roared with disbelief because in less than a minute, Kai had dismantled all four attacks without a single weapon strike or piece of armor. Kai stood tall, his chest rising and falling with controlled breaths, and he began to speak while his opponents recovered. His voice calm, yet carrying weight, he told the cadets above that what they had seen was not magic nor trickery, but the second weapon of humanity, the mind. He explained that while the body was the first tool sharpened by endurance and gravity, the mind was the force that directed it. He spoke of training that taught humans to anticipate rhythm, to sense fear in an enemy, to calculate timing and angles faster than conscious thought. He described the lessons of warriors who studied patience and strategy as fiercely as they studied strikes and takedowns. The cadets watched in silence, some furiously recording notes, while others stared with wide eyes, realizing that every movement had been a lesson in itself. Kai drew a line across the floor with a piece of chalk taken from his pocket. He marked simple lanes intersecting in patterns. Then he explained how these lines created zones of control, how a fighter could shape where an enemy moved without ever touching them. He stepped across the chalk with precise motions, his feet showing how angles and positions forced an opponent into mistakes. The insectoid cadets hesitated to re-engage, but Veshril barked orders demanding they continue. They attacked again, this time wary and cautious, but Kai's control only grew clearer. He shifted within the chalk lanes, making their strikes stumble into each other. Two collided shoulder to chest, while the others tried to adjust but were pulled into awkward positions. Kai gently tapped their elbows or redirected their weight until they crumpled onto the floor again. The students erupted, some cheering openly, others whispering that perhaps the human was proving something none had believed possible. Veshril's jaw tightened, his pride being eroded in front of hundreds of witnesses. He declared that the next round would not be on the ground, nor within simple gravity. He ordered the test to continue in the zero-gravity chamber, claiming that no human body could adapt without weight or ground. Kai only nodded, his calm unbroken, his eyes showing no trace of doubt. The crowd buzzed louder still, knowing they were about to see a trial that would push the human beyond anything shown so far. The walls shifted, the chamber floor opened, and the transition field shimmered as the arena prepared to become a void, where even balance itself would vanish. Kai floated upward, his body poised as though this was not the first time he had faced such trials. His breath measured and his muscles braced for the shift. He whispered almost to himself that falling had always been the first lesson of his people, and that once a human learned to fall, there was nothing left that could surprise them. The chamber transformed around them as the field shifted and gravity bled away. The floor no longer pulled at their feet, and the cadets drifted upward into the air. The insectoid challengers who had struggled moments before now seemed eager again, for they believed their light frames and multiple limbs would give them the edge in this new test. Instructor Veshril announced to the onlookers that humans were bound to gravity, and without it, their movements would collapse. He spoke with renewed certainty, and many cadets nodded, agreeing that here finally the human would be shown for what he was. Kai simply inhaled deeply and let himself rise into the center of the chamber. His body coiling slightly, arms open to steady his spin. The first insectoid shot forward, propelling itself with a sharp kick against the wall. Kai waited, eyes calm, then shifted his torso just enough to catch the oncoming arm. He did not fight the motion, but instead guided it across his shoulder, turning his whole body into a pivot. The cadet spun, out of control, tumbling helplessly into the opposite wall. The audience gasped again. The second cadet launched from above, slicing downward with scythe-like limbs. Kai drew his knees close, then snapped them outward to shift his momentum into a clean roll, avoiding the strike and pressing his hand against the cadet's back to redirect the force. The alien spun past him, twisting through empty air. The third cadet circled, trying to use quick bursts against the walls to trap him. Kai extended his arms, pressing lightly against two surfaces to stabilize, then with a short push, he drifted diagonally, cutting across the cadet's line. The alien overextended, and Kai caught its wrist, spun his own body as leverage, and gently shoved the opponent into the fourth cadet, who was preparing to strike. Both collided, tangled, and floated away stunned. The crowd erupted with disbelief, louder now than in the previous trials. Veshrul's scowl deepened, his claws clenching the railing as he realized this contest was slipping beyond his control. Kai steadied himself by controlling his breath. Small bursts of air pushed through his nose and mouth to fine-tune his orientation. He explained to the cadets watching that humans were not only children of gravity but also of oceans and skies, that from birth they learned balance on shifting surfaces from waves to wind, that human training taught them to fall, then to rise, then to move, as if weight itself were only another teacher. He said that zero gravity was not a death sentence for a human body, but simply a new lesson, a space to apply creativity, discipline, and calm thought. The insectoids regrouped and came at him again, this time all four together, their bodies flashing with frustration. Kai moved with flowing precision, tucking and stretching limbs to alter his path. He slid between them, touching only lightly on their joints or elbows, sending them off course without brute strength. One lunged too fast, and Kai spun around the momentum, coiling his body into a loop, then using the force to pin the alien softly against the wall before letting it go. The others crashed into one another in a clumsy knot. Kai floated free, untouched, his calm presence undeniable. The audience broke into cheers. Even those who had doubted now leaned forward with admiration. Cadets began to scribble frantic notes on datapads, realizing they were witnessing not a failure, but a lesson that would change their entire perspective on combat. Veshrul, however, barked furiously, calling an end to the round and declaring that chance had favored the human, yet even his own voice trembled slightly as if he could not fully believe his words. Then suddenly the chamber lights flickered and alarms wailed, echoing through the halls of the academy, doors sealed with heavy clangs and red symbols flashed across the walls. The cadets looked at each other in confusion. Veshrul slammed the console demanding status reports, but the automated voice of the academy grid announced that intruders had breached the perimeter and the armories were sealed under emergency lock. The cadets realized with horror that they were trapped inside the training grounds without weapons. Kai's eyes sharpened, his breathing still, calm as he understood what this meant. The real test was about to begin, and this time there would be no staged rules, no safe chamber, and no instructors controlling the outcome. The crowd erupted in panic, but Kai spoke firmly, telling the cadets to stay calm, to control their breath, and to use their bodies as shields for one another. He reminded them that fear was the first enemy to defeat. Veshrul froze, torn between his pride and the sudden reality that the human might be their only guide. Now the alarms grew louder. The shadows of intruders moved beyond the sealed doors, and the academy would soon discover whether the lessons of body and mind were enough when survival itself hung in the balance. The alarms continued to wail as the blue zone slowly powered down, and the walls opened to release the cadets into the wider academy corridors. The air was heavy with fear and uncertainty, because none of the students had ever trained for a real incursion without weapons instructor. Veshrul barked orders to stay put, but the younger cadets began to panic, their voices rising in frightened bursts. Kai stepped forward, his calm presence cutting through the chaos, his voice steady as he told them to breathe, to keep their eyes on him, and to understand that their first task was not to fight but to survive and protect one another. The doors at the far end trembled as shadows moved beyond the barrier. The Academy security system repeated its message that all weapon vaults had been sealed to prevent intruder access, which meant the cadets and their instructor were defenseless. Veshril growled that they should wait for reinforcements, but Kai shook his head and explained that waiting would only give the intruders more ground. He reminded the group that their bodies were tools and their minds were guides, and that fear could be shaped into discipline if they followed his lead. He guided them through the corridor, pointing out benches low, barriers and support columns, showing how these simple features of the environment could shape the path of attackers. He had them form small groups, each cadet linked by gripping sleeves or shoulders, creating chains of stability so no one would drift into panic. He taught them quick carrying holds for the wounded, using 2 arms to cradle weight, or 2 cadets to form makeshift stretchers. Every move was simple yet efficient, designed to keep their hearts steady and their focus sharp. The first breach came with a loud crack and sparks flying from the door. The intruders stepped inside, tall armored figures with strange visors covering their faces, their weapons disabled by the lockdown, but their strength and intimidation intact. The cadets shrank back, yet Kai moved forward lightly, tapping a loose sign panel against the wall to draw the attention of the intruders. The clang echoed, and the figures turned toward the sound. Kai signaled the cadets to scatter into shadowed alcoves. He then slipped across the floor, using speed and silence to confuse the enemy. The intruders split their formation, chasing echoes instead of real targets. When one drew close, Kai pressed against the wall, his body low, then stepped sharply to the side, letting the armored figure overextend. He hooked the intruder's leg with his own, guiding the stumble into a fall. The crash reverberated down the corridor. The other intruders swung around, but by then Kai had already melted back into the shadows. 2 cadets used the moment to pull the fallen figure's helmet free, revealing a confused and disoriented enemy who had not expected resistance without weapons. Kai raised a hand to stop them from striking. He reminded them that the goal was not destruction but protection. The intruders regrouped and began to push toward the infirmary where younger cadets had been sheltered. Veshril clenched his claws in frustration, but finally ordered the older cadets to follow Kai's lead. Together, they moved through side passages, Kai using every environmental cue to keep them one step ahead. He taught them to use footsteps as signals, a stomp, meaning to halt, a double tap, meaning to move. He had them rehearse it quickly until they obeyed in silence. As the group neared the infirmary, the sound of intruder boots echoed ahead. Kai crouched and explained a simple plan. He had the cadets scatter small debris across the floor to create noise traps, then positioned 3 of them in narrow doorways, where only one intruder could enter at a time. He reminded them to use leverage, not brute force, to redirect and disable without exposing themselves. When the first intruder marched in, the noise trap crackled under his steps. The cadets braced too, slipped aside and hooked his arms while a third pushed with his shoulder. The armored figure stumbled forward, falling heavily to the ground. The audience of cadets who had followed now saw their training come alive for the first time. They realized they were capable of resisting even without their weapons. Kai's steady hand and calm words gave them courage, and even Veshril found himself giving sharp commands that reinforced Kai's tactics. The instructor's pride had little space left. In the face of real danger, together they moved deeper, shielding the infirmary from the advancing intruder teams. Yet the battle was not over, for, as they cleared one hallway, a deeper rumble shook the walls. The sound of heavier boots and stronger machines moving closer. The academy lights flickered again and the emergency sirens shifted, tone signaling that a larger enemy unit was approaching. Kai looked around at the cadets, their faces pale, but their bodies steadier than before. He told them that the first lesson was to survive, but the second was to protect those who could not stand. And now that lesson would be tested against an enemy far stronger than any sparring match. The cadets formed ranks, their hearts pounding, but their minds guided by the human who had once laughed from the back of a classroom and now stood at the front, ready to meet the threat without a single weapon in hand. The rumble of heavy boots echoed through the wide corridors of the academy, and the approaching intruders were unlike the first group, taller, bulkier, their armored exoskeletons gleaming with energy conduits pulsing faintly as if they themselves were alive. Kai crouched low behind a support beam, his eyes scanning every surface. Every shadow he had, the cadets form a protective line in front of the infirmary. The younger ones huddled close, guided by hands and shoulders of those older. They trembled but followed his instructions faithfully. Kai's mind raced with angles and timing. He knew that direct engagement would be disastrous. The intruders were strong and swift, and while their weapons were disabled, their strength alone could crush a human if misjudged. He whispered to the cadets to use their bodies as levers, to shift weight, to redirect force, to make themselves uncatchable. The first of the towering intruders lunged forward, smashing through a wall panel to gain momentum. Kai met the attack by moving with the flow of the charge. He did not resist, but rather allowed the figure to carry itself into the corridor. Then, with a subtle twist and a controlled pivot, he guided the armored giant toward a low archway the cadets had prepared as a choke point, one brace on the wall, two pressing lightly on the shoulders, as if invisible strings connected them to the human in front. Kai led the motion, and the intruder stumbled through the opening, unable to adjust its bulk in time. The impact rattled the metal flooring and sparks flew. Another intruder came at them. From above, using the staircase for leverage, Kai tucked himself under the rail, then shot upward. Catching the attacker by the wrist and guiding the momentum downward, he tapped the cadet nearest to him to grab the ankle and redirect the force together. They sent the armored figure crashing onto its back on the lower level, landing with a heavy thud that shook the corridor. The remaining intruders hesitated. Kai's calm eyes met theirs. He did not attack with fists or weapons. He simply moved in, their projected paths forcing missteps and awkward overreaches. The cadets followed his motion, sliding and pivoting, using every surface, every corner as advantage points. Kai whispered lessons as he moved, his voice low, yet carrying authority. He reminded them that the human body was a complex system of leverage and motion, that even the strongest opponent could be guided if one understood angles and timing. He spoke of rhythm in motion, of anticipating force before it arrived, and of using gravity and momentum as allies. He demonstrated each subtle step, pressing lightly against elbows, pushing just enough to disturb balance, redirecting with fingers and shoulders only, never harming, but always controlling. The cadets began to mirror, his motions, a foot here, a hand there, a shoulder nudge. They became extensions of his strategy, each action fluid and precise. No panic, no hesitation. The intruders grew frustrated, their heavy bodies colliding with walls and each other, their attempts to strike or grab met with unexpected redirection and loss of balance. The academy itself became a partner in the defense, as Kai guided his students to use walls, ceilings, and floors as tools to multiply effect. The corridors echoed with shouts of surprise from intruders, and the quiet coordination of cadets. Veshril, who had long doubted human ability, now barked orders not to restrain, but to imitate the motions he saw from Kai. The instructor's pride wrestled with necessity, but he could not deny the efficiency of the strategy as cadets began to move in tandem, weaving around the intruders' bodies, guiding them harmlessly into positions where they were contained or gently redirected toward open areas. Kai floated lightly across the floor, using small bursts of balance to adjust his posture in zero-gravity zones, still affecting some parts of the corridor. He whispered lessons about adapting to every environment, and about how fear was an enemy greater than any physical opponent. The intruders regrouped in a corner, pressing for an exit block. But by then the cadets had learned to anticipate each other's moves, each twist and shift controlled by intuition, and Kai's steady hand. The armored figures tried to overextend their strikes, only to find themselves caught on walls or nudged off balance by human bodies that seemed fragile, yet were impossibly coordinated. The older cadets began to shield the younger ones, using their own weight as buffers. They created a moving barrier where each human was both shield and guide. Time stretched, and the corridor echoed with heavy boots clashing against precise human movements. Yet no cadet was injured. All was controlled and precise. Kai's presence was magnetic. Each decision, preemptive, each motion calculated. The intruders grew weary. Their own momentum turned against them while the cadets gained confidence, their breathing steady, their hearts synchronized with the rhythm Kai had instilled. Finally, after what seemed hours but was only moments, the heavier unit faltered, trapped in positions they could not recover from. The cadets stood tall, their chest heaving but their eyes bright and focused. Kai moved through them, placing hands on shoulders, correcting stance, and alignment, a soft word here. A guiding push there. They were not exhausted but awakened to the possibilities of a mind over brute force. They realized for the first time that their bodies alone were weapons in the hands of discipline and knowledge. Veshril lowered his claws, his eyes wide with realization and perhaps fear that the human had reshaped the concept of power in the academy. The corridors were quiet now, save for the careful breathing of cadets and the heavy breathing of intruders who had learned their lesson without a single weapon strike from the humans. Kai surveyed the group, his gaze calm yet piercing. He reminded them that the last challenge would be to lead their own moves in a coordinated, strike without hesitation, without panic, and that the ultimate lesson of control and protection had yet to be tested. The corridors of the academy had settled into a tense silence. The intruders had been pushed back, but their presence was still felt, in the vibrations of the walls and in the echoes of heavy boots that had not yet left the upper levels. Kai led the cadets forward, each step, measured each movement, deliberate. The younger ones followed like shadows, their small hands gripping the shoulders of those in front, their faces pale but their eyes sharp with focus. Kai reminded them that this was the final test, not against enemies with weapons, but against doubt, against fear, against the instinct to run. He whispered that humans could fight without arms because their minds and bodies together were more than enough, and every step forward was a step into understanding their own power. They approached the central atrium, the largest open space in the academy, a place where countless simulations had been run but never with real intruders. The ceiling was high with support beams crisscrossing and lighting panels flickering. Kai motioned for the cadets to spread in formations. He showed them how to use angles, corners, and light, to confuse the intruders, how to turn shadows into allies and footsteps into signals. He moved ahead lightly, guiding each group with subtle gestures, signaling when to duck, when to pivot, when to slide along walls, and when to press together to shield. Those less experienced, the intruders had regrouped themselves across the atrium, their exoskeletons humming with power as they prepared for a coordinated push. But the humans had already begun their own choreography, a fluid dance of anticipation and controlled motion. The first intruder charged with a roar, trying to use sheer size to intimidate Kai, sidestepped lightly, guiding the figure past a column, then nudged the cadet nearby to press against its leg just enough to off-balance it. The intruder stumbled forward, narrowly missing the next human in line, a smaller cadet who had learned to pivot and slide without hesitation. The crowd of intruders hesitated as the humans moved in ways that seemed impossible without weapons. Each motion, a precise calculation of leverage and timing, every step coordinated yet flowing freely, so that no two movements were exactly the same. Another intruder swung a massive arm down toward a cadet who rolled along the floor, using momentum to avoid contact. Kai pressed against a support beam, then with a subtle push against the intruder's wrist, guided the arm to sweep past the atrium's edge. The cadets around followed the pattern, each step measured to redirect potential force into harmless directions. They became a living net of motion and anticipation. The intruders tried to adapt, but the humans were too fluid, too unpredictable, their bodies reacting instinctively to every shift in weight and angle. Kai signaled the cadets to begin a series of coordinated maneuvers. They slid along walls, twisting and pivoting, guiding the intruders into pre-prepared positions, 3 in one corner, 2 in another, with only their own momentum used to control the larger opponents. The younger cadets watched and mirrored the older ones' every motion, instinctive yet deliberate, their breathing synchronized and their minds focused on anticipation and redirection. They realized they were no longer afraid. The energy in the atrium had shifted from panic. To command each human was a node in a network, a force without weapons yet impossible to defeat. The intruders made one last coordinated push across the atrium, their heavy limbs crashing against walls and floors. Kai countered each strike with subtle nudges and angles, slipping between blows, guiding their bodies harmlessly into positions of containment. The cadets flowed with him, every step, a calculation, every movement, a choice in harmony with those around them. One intruder lunged at a group of younger cadets only to find themselves redirected into a narrow corridor, where the architecture itself became a guide, pressing and pivoting with their own weight to keep balance lost. They stumbled but were unharmed. The humans' coordination made every opponent a part of their own rhythm. Visceral watched from the shadows, realizing that the class that had once been laughed at was now a machine of controlled power. No weapons, and yet undefeatable, their minds and bodies merged into a force that was precise, confident, and awe-inspiring. The cadets themselves now stood tall, their eyes bright and their movements assured. They were no longer students in fear, but humans who had discovered the true measure of strength. Kai moved through them, placing hands on shoulders, correcting alignment, whispering praise and reminders that their bodies were their most powerful weapons, if only guided by focus and discipline. Finally, the intruders faltered, unable to anticipate or overcome the coordinated flow of human motion. They retreated inch by inch, guided and redirected by the cadets themselves until the atrium was cleared, their heavy presence no longer threatening. Kai called the cadets together, reminding them that today they had learned the greatest lesson of all, that fear could be overcome, that weapons were not always needed, and that humans could be unstoppable, not because of what they held, but because of how they moved and how they thought. The cadets exhaled in unison. The tension in their muscles melted into relief and exhilaration. Their eyes met one another, and for the first time, they understood the truth behind Kai's laughter. In the back of the classroom, humans were different. Humans were unpredictable. Humans could fight without weapons, and today they had proven it beyond any doubt. They had faced fear and emerged stronger, wiser, and united. The lessons of movement and mind had merged into a living demonstration of human potential. The academy was silent now, except for the soft steps of cadets returning to their quarters and the distant hum of disabled intruders. Kai's gaze swept over them, proud yet calm, knowing that this was not the end, but a beginning, a day that would be remembered in the academy for generations, a day when humans had laughed last and strongest, and the lesson had been learned once and for all. The cadets gathered in the great hall, their bodies still trembling from the exertion, yet alive with a fire that no weapon could ignite. Kai stood before them, his eyes calm but shining with pride. He told them that everything they had done today was only the beginning of what humans could achieve. He spoke of the power of intuition, of balance, of movement, and how every breath and step could be turned into an advantage, how fear could be transformed into focus and hesitation into precision. The young cadets listened intently, their minds absorbing every word, every nuance. They realized that strength was not measured by size or armor or weaponry, but by the ability to think, to adapt, and to move with purpose. Outside the academy, the sun began to rise, casting long golden beams across the training fields. The shadows danced in rhythm with the cadets. Hearts and Kai led them through exercises, not with instructions, but with subtle signals. A tilt of the head, a shift of weight, a flicker of the eyes, and the cadets moved as one, flowing and weaving through the open spaces, learning to anticipate and respond without hesitation. Every muscle engaged, every mind alert. They practiced falls and rolls and pivots, each movement a conversation with gravity, with momentum, with their own bodies. Their laughter echoed across the fields, a sound that was part relief, part triumph, part uncontainable human spirit. Kai then told them to remember the lessons of the classroom, of the intruders, of the chaos that had seemed overwhelming, and how they had turned it into mastery. He spoke of confidence that came from understanding, not arrogance, and of the quiet strength that rose from patience and observation. He reminded them that every day they trained, every challenge they faced could be an opportunity to discover more of what it meant to be human, a creature capable of bending circumstances to its will. Not through tools, but through thought, through motion, through unity, and through courage. The cadets nodded, their faces bright and determined, knowing that the laughter from the back of the classroom was not mockery, but a herald of the truth that humans were different and unstoppable. They practiced into the afternoon, their bodies moving seamlessly, Kai moving among them, correcting a stance here, guiding a pivot there, whispering encouragement and challenge. The cadets began to innovate, using what they had learned to create new maneuvers to protect each other, to disarm imaginary foes, to flow like water around obstacles. The academy itself became a living participant in Their dance, each corridor, each wall, each floor and ceiling a partner in teaching and learning. Every cadet discovering in themselves a strength that had been dormant, a potential that the universe might underestimate but never again could ignore. As the sun dipped low, the cadets gathered once more, their breathing steady, their faces shining with sweat and satisfaction. Kai stood before them and said that today they had proven themselves not only to the intruders, not only to their instructors, but to themselves, that they had discovered a truth about humanity that would echo far beyond the academy, that humans could fight without weapons, because their will, their mind, their body, and their unity were more powerful than any tool that the galaxy could forge, and that from this day forward, they would carry this knowledge as both shield and sword. And in the quiet that followed, the cadets felt a deep connection not only to each other but to something larger, to a legacy of resilience and ingenuity, a fire that could never be extinguished, a laughter that would always echo from the back of classrooms, reminding all who doubted that humans were capable of the impossible, that every challenge could be met, every threat redirected, and every obstacle turned into opportunity, because they were human, and nothing would ever change that. The end.